Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Invitation with Polite Edges. Hercule Poirot liked his mornings untroubled. The post was delivered, the coffee precisely hot, the sugar crystals dissolved with mathematical purity. He regarded correspondence not as a mere duty but as a small ritual of order, each envelope opened in sequence, each card or letter laid squarely before him. When the heavy cream envelope arrived, embossed with a family crest and sealed with wax, Poirot allowed himself a smile of appreciation before even breaking it open. The card was engraved, with careful flourishes that hinted at money but not quite taste. It announced that Sir Lionel Beresford of Moor End, Hampshire, would be unveiling his new glass house, a grand conservatory, built to house the most delicate and rare orchids, on Friday next. The invitation spoke of triumphs of British horticulture and private patronage and concluded with a promise that Sir Lionel would sign a deed the following day, gifting his entire orchid collection to a London institution. Poirot raised his brows. Orchids. He thought of them as strange, proud creatures, flowers that often concealed cruelty behind beauty, plants that thrived not on soil but on air, parasites that lived by exacting standards. How curious, he mused, that a man should place his fortune, his name, his reputation in such blooms. He was still considering this when Inspector Japp, arriving on another errand, noticed the card. Beresford, eh? Rich as cream and twice as sour, said Japp, tossing his hat onto the arm of Poirot's chair. I'll wager that conservatories cost him more than it's worth. Whole thing's been the talk of the Society Fellows. He's got enemies, that one. Every orchid collector in England thinks he's cheated them out of something rare. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Mon cher Japp, it is most improper to insult a man before his hospitality is even accepted. Hospitality, bah, said Japp. He only invites people to show off. Still, might be worth going. Wouldn't surprise me if one of those friends of his tried to sabotage the whole thing. I'll say this, it'll be a colourful gathering. And so it was agreed. Moor End sat on a rise above a narrow strip of shingle where the sea came in sharp and restless. The village below had a harbour no larger than a toy box, with boats rocking like stubborn ponies tugging at their reins. The estate itself loomed grey against the horizon, a square Georgian pile weathered by salt winds. Behind it, half hidden by brick walls, stretched the new conservatory, a glittering skeleton of iron and glass, shining like a proud cat stretching in the winter light. The guests assembled in the main hall that evening, greeted by Sir Lionel himself. He was a man of bristles, a beard that seemed ready for battle, a voice that scraped, and a gaze that darted like a knife in a sheath. He welcomed Poirot with a firm shake of the hand, though without warmth. Glad you could come, he said briskly. One hears you have an eye for puzzles, Monsieur Poirot. Well, you'll find no puzzle here but the perfection of nature. Lady Eugenie Beresford followed, younger by decades, dressed in a gown of pale blue that caught the candlelight. She moved with ease, a soft counterpoint to her husband's brusqueness. Her smile lingered too long upon each guest, as though she had learned that charm could smooth the roughest edge. The circle widened as introductions were made. There was Dr. Malcolm Calder, a botanist with opinions as stiff as his collar. His hair was iron grey, his nose aquiline, his expression that of a man who suspected the world of incompetence. Sir Lionel's collection is spirited, he said, with the air of condemning a student essay. Ivo Beresford, the nephew, looked very unlike his uncle, handsome, with the sort of eyes that refused to rest. He smiled quickly and often, though his smile seemed to ask for pardon rather than to grant it. My uncle is a difficult man, he whispered to Poirot, but one must admire his dedication. Mr. Gideon Tate, the head gardener, was a man of clay and thorn, his hands marked with scratches and his boots heavy with soil. He spoke little but bristled when Dr. Calder muttered about amateur interference. His pride in the conservatory was clear, though tinged with resentment that Sir Lionel took all the credit. Miss Eleanor Rowan, Sir Lionel's secretary, was calm, pale, and efficient, with a sharp mind evident in the quickness of her eyes. She carried a folder under her arm even at dinner, and her speech was measured, precise. Poirot noted the neatness with which she excused herself from conversation she did not value. And lastly Mrs. Priddy, the housekeeper. Tall, plain, and severe, she carried the authority of one who had managed the household for decades. Her presence was like starched linen, no wrinkle tolerated, no frivolity encouraged. Dinner was lavish, though conversation prickly. Dr. Calder expounded on the need for private collections to be placed under professional care. An orchid is wasted in the hands of a man who wishes only to boast, he declared. Better to boast of an orchid than to ignore it altogether, retorted Sir Lionel. You professionals are all the same, jealous when you do not own. Lady Eugenie smoothed the exchange with laughter, while Miss Rowan's pen scratched in her notebook even as dessert was served. Evo drank too quickly. Mr. Tate glared into his soup. Mrs. Priddy never smiled at all. Poirot observed it all with delicate interest. He was a connoisseur not of plants but of human expressions, the arch of a brow, the twitch of a mouth, the glint of an eye. And that evening he observed one moment worth cataloguing, Lady Eugenie's glance towards Dr. Calder, swift and exact, as if a word had been spoken without sound. Poirot placed it in the back of his mind, beside another detail, the faint scent of bergamot that clung to Lady Eugenie's gloves, not quite the fragrance of a flower but of tea and of control. After dinner came speeches. Sir Lionel stood in the hall, his voice carrying above the firelight. He spoke of triumph, of rarity, of the permanence of his gift to the institution. Tomorrow, he declared, I will sign the deed that places my orchids beyond private quarrel. They will belong to England, to history. The guests clapped, though not all with enthusiasm. Poirot saw Mr. Tate's jaw tighten, Evo's eyes drop, and Dr. Calder's thin smile curl like smoke. Only Lady Eugenie's hands met in graceful applause, though her eyes remained on the floor. Later, when the guests retired, Poirot lingered by the tall windows. Outside, the conservatory gleamed under the moonlight, its panes catching the sea's reflection. The glass house seemed alive, breathing against the night, a creature with lungs of mist and a heart of orchids. Poirot tapped the glass with a fingertip and whispered to himself, a triumph, yes, but one that hides its own dangers. For in Poirot's experience, when passions run high, when pride is pricked, and when fortunes are bound up in beauty, murder is never far behind. Chapter 2, The Conservatory Wakes. Morning broke at Moor End with a restless tide against the shingle and a brisk wind carrying the tang of salt. The house itself stirred to life reluctantly, as if its grey walls disliked being roused. Poirot, always an early riser, had already taken his chocolate in bed and dressed with fastidious neatness before stepping into the corridor. He paused at the landing window. Beyond the slope of clipped lawns, the conservatory glimmered with its curtain of glass, exhaling clouds of steam into the frosty air. It seemed both proud and secretive, like a theatre before the play begins. Sir Lionel had been up before anyone. Mrs. Priddy informed them at breakfast that he had risen at 6:30 sharp, as is his habit, taken a brisk walk about the gardens, and declared that he would inspect the conservatory privately before receiving guests. With his key on the ribbon, she said, as though the key itself were part of the household's rituals. The morning meal gathered the same circle as last night, though moods were altered by the light of day. Lady Eugenie sat graceful at the head of the table, her hands poised over her teacup. She wore pearls and a faint smile, though her eye seemed to drift often to the window. Evo was restless, tapping his spoon against the rim of his coffee cup until Miss Rowan gently stilled it with a remark about nerves making noise. Dr. Calder had already launched into a lecture on humidity and light, declaring that the conservatory's orientation was less than ideal for orchids of the rarer breeds. Mr. Tate grunted once, low in his throat, and resumed buttering his bread as if it were an act of defiance. Poirot, who never ate more than was necessary, contented himself with a brioche roll and observed. He noted how Miss Rowan, though quiet, kept her papers close at hand, particularly a parchment folder embossed with Sir Lionel's seal. When questioned, she explained briskly, "The deed is prepared. Sir Lionel intends to sign it at noon." She tapped the folded document with her pencil. "The trustees from the London institution will arrive to witness." Japp, meanwhile, helped himself heartily to ham and eggs. "No crime here yet, Poirot," he said between bites. "Though I'll admit, I half expect someone to push Beresford into one of his own flower beds before the weekend's out." The meal concluded. Servants cleared the plates with quiet precision. Mrs. Priddy lingered, checking the silverware for smudges, and finally departed with her keys jangling faintly at her waist. By 11 o'clock, the first carriages and motorcars arrived bearing visitors eager to see Sir Lionel's orchids. They were gentlemen in tweed and ladies wrapped in furs, their chatter brisk with speculation. "The rarest collection in Europe," said one. "If Calder had his way it would all rot in the Natural History Museum," scoffed another. The guests strolled the lawns, awaiting Sir Lionel's formal welcome. But Sir Lionel did not appear. Miss Rowan, punctual by nature, began to frown at her watch. Lady Eugenie assured the company that her husband was likely still lost in his plants, though her smile was fixed and pale. At last, Japp muttered, "I'll fetch him," and strode towards the conservatory, Poirot at his side. The great glass house shimmered with condensation, its windows beading with moisture. Poirot placed his hand lightly against a pane. The inner warmth pulsed through the cold glass. "It is like the lungs of a giant beast," he murmured. The door was locked. Japp rattled it firmly. No answer came. Miss Rowan, summoned, shook her head. "Sir Lionel keeps the only key with him. None of the staff have access. Except," Japp added, "Mr. Tate here." The gardener flushed. "No, sir. He never allowed me a key. Said I was too free with the place. There's a spare in the shed, but he swore me never to use it unless he lay on his deathbed." "Perhaps," said Poirot softly, "that condition is fulfilled." Tate returned with the duplicate key, muttering protests. The lock turned grudgingly. A wave of humid air rushed out, heavy and strange, carrying with it a faint sweetness. Poirot's nostrils twitched. It was the perfume of orchids, yes, but mixed with something else, something stale, metallic. Inside, the glass house was a jungle of delicate splendor. Orchids in ghostly white, sullen purple, and startling yellow cascaded from shells and hung in baskets. The air glistened with droplets that slid down leaves like tears. And there, between two low beds of orchids, sprawled Sir Lionel Beresford, face down on the slatted walkway, his great shoulders still, his cheek pressed against the damp wood. For a moment, silence claimed the room. Only the drip of condensation broke it. Lady Eugenie gave a soft gasp. Ivo cursed under his breath. Japp bent swiftly. "He's gone," he said, after a brief examination. "Stone dead." The village doctor, summoned in haste, arrived within minutes. He knelt beside the body, fingers to the throat, then shook his head gravely. "Heart, most likely. The heat in here would overwhelm any man of his years." Shock upon shock. Poirot said nothing. He crouched delicately, his patent shoes avoiding the damp patches, his gaze sweeping over the details others overlooked. He noticed the faint crack along the nearest thermometer's glass tube. He noted the clay saucer under a bench, its rim edged with a thin white crust and a shallow pool of water glinting like quicksilver. He observed the faint dusting of pale grit along the slats near Sir Lionel's body. Grit in a hothouse? Curious. Rising, Poirot adjusted his cuffs. His expression was unreadable. Lady Eugenie pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Poirot's eye caught again the faint fragrance of bergamot that clung to the fabric. A curious perfume for the morning. Miss Rowan, pale but composed, stepped forward with the folder. Sir Lionel meant to sign this deed today, she said, her voice clipped. She held up the parchment, but her hand trembled. Poirot saw the smear of ink across its margin, an error unlikely in one so meticulous. And more, the smear was on the left side, as though made by a left-handed writer. He filed the detail silently. Mr. Tate shook his head vehemently. He had no cause to be in danger. The house is sound, the plants well. He must have fainted, nothing more. But his eye strayed nervously to the broken thermometer. Meanwhile, Ivo lingered by the door, his gaze fixed not on the body but on the harbour below, visible through the steamed glass. A fish van had rattled up the lane earlier, Mrs. Priddy had signed for the delivery. Ivo watched the van now departing, its wheels crunching on gravel. His hand gripped the sill as though steadying himself. Poirot noticed it all. The wiped shelf above the bench, the missing rectangle of dust the size of a brick, the faint chalky smear along the lower pane of glass, as if something solid had been dragged against it. Details, details. Each a seed, waiting to germinate. The doctor straightened. Nothing to be done. A tragedy, but natural enough. Natural. Poirot repeated softly, his moustaches twitching. Ah, doctor, nature does many things, but seldom does she leave so many small contradictions in her wake. And with that he turned, his eye sweeping once more across the orchids, their waxy petals glistening like little masks. They seemed to watch, silent witnesses, while outside the gulls wheeled and the sea kept its counsel. Chapter 3, Little Discrepancies. The body of Sir Lionel Beresford was carried with subdued ceremony to the library, the one room in the house large enough for such grim business. Curtains were drawn, the doctor murmured platitudes about frailty of the human frame, and Mrs. Priddy crossed herself with a gesture that seemed both dutiful and oddly stiff. Yet Hercule Poirot did not follow. Instead, he lingered within the conservatory. His small, neat figure appeared almost fragile against the swelling green chaos of orchids, but his eyes were sharp and precise, alighting upon each corner like a jeweller examining facets of a stone. A death natural, they say, he murmured, running a finger across the edge of a bench. His fingertip came away with a dusting of white grit, fine, almost crystalline. He bent lower, examining the slats where Sir Lionel had fallen. More of the same white dust lay there, scattered too evenly to be accident. But what is this? Orchids do not weep salt. Poirot turned to the broken thermometer fixed upon a nail. Its crack was fine but noticeable, as though strained by sudden change. He placed his hand upon the glass pane nearby. Though the day was cold, the interior had been oppressively hot. Yet the air now carried no sign of fire or stove, only the damp breath of the plants. The clay saucer beneath the bench caught his notice next. He lifted it delicately with a handkerchief. Around the rim clung a brittle ring of white crystals, while within lay a shallow puddle of water. He sniffed, then touched the edge of the rim and brushed his finger against his tongue. Salt, but not kitchen salt. Finer, sharper, with a sting that prickled the mouth. Most curious, Poirot whispered. A residue that speaks of something unnatural. At that moment, Japp entered, his heavy tread echoing against the glass. Poirot, you'll be catching your death in this damp. Nothing to see here but a poor old man gone to his rest. Poirot smiled faintly. But there is always something to see, mon ami. Look! He pointed to the smear upon the inside latch of the door, a faint black streak, like graphite. Someone has tampered. A cord drawn through, perhaps, to close or lock from without. This is not the work of Sir Lionel alone. Japp squinted. Could be. Though I'd put it down to the gardener's tools. He looks the sort to smear half a shed over his hands. Perhaps, said Poirot smoothly, though his eyes remained thoughtful. The suspects, or rather, the mourners, assembled again in the hall. Lady Eugenie was pale but composed, holding a handkerchief that smelled of bergamot. It was his heart, she insisted. It must have been. Miss Rowan, cool and precise, brought the deed to Poirot. If you please, sir, Sir Lionel intended to sign this today. She unfolded it upon a table. Poirot bent to look. The ink, though dry, bore a smear across the left margin. A left-handed writer, careless, or interrupted. Miss Rowan herself was left-handed, he noted, remembering her flourish at breakfast. He filed the detail neatly away. Ivo Beresford paced near the windows, glancing often towards the harbour below. His face was taut, his lips dry. Poirot observed the young man's pocket-book half open upon a chair, and in it a glimpse of a folded note, stamped with the unmistakable print of a moneylender's office. When Ivo caught Poirot's eye, he snapped the book shut and flushed. Dr. Calder, meanwhile, was already lecturing again, his hands clasped behind his back. This is precisely why such collections should never rest in the hands of amateurs. The humidity, the poor ventilation, the misguided use of heat, any of these could have endangered him. It is Providence, perhaps, that the orchids are to be placed under institutional care at last. His tone made it clear that he was the institution he had in mind. Mr. Tate bristled visibly. Don't you blame the house or the plants, Doctor. I keep them well. Healthier than most men. His scarred hands clenched. It's the meddling orders, moving things here and there, that upset the balance. Sir Lionel was always after this or that arrangement. He never listened. Poirot stepped lightly into the fray. Messrs, calm yourselves. It is not the quarrel of men but the quiet of details that interests me. He turned to Mrs. Priddy. And you, madam, what do you say? You are mistress of the kitchens, no? Her gaze was firm, her voice clipped. Sir Lionel was as he always was. Demanding, precise. He took his key and went to his plants. That is all. I saw nothing unusual. Yet, Poirot pressed gently, you alone signed for the fish delivery this morning, did you not? The van that rattled up the lane. Mrs. Priddy stiffened. Naturally. I managed the supplies. Nothing odd in that. Poirot's eyes lingered on her hands, red from scrubbing, the nails short, the knuckles strong. He thought again of the saucer's rim of frost and water. But he only inclined his head politely. Later, in the potting shed, Poirot sought the truth hidden in tools and soil. Among coils of twine and stacks of clay pots, he found a stub of soft pencil, its edge smudged with graphite, and beside it a coil of thin cord. He held them up delicately. So, the means for a little trickery. On the floor lay a damp scrap of newsprint. He lifted it carefully. A fragment of the previous night's shipping forecast, smudged by water. He recalled the fish van once more. Newspapers wrapped round blocks of ice, perhaps. His moustaches quivered with thought. When he returned to the conservatory at dusk, he stood silently before the orchids. Their waxen petals gleamed like masks in the dim light. They are beautiful, yes, he whispered, but also cruel. They live not on kindness but by cunning. A fitting stage, NSCE par, for a death so strange. Poirot straightened his cuffs, his eyes narrowing. A picture was forming, faint but insistent. A cracked thermometer, a rim of frost where frost had no business, a residue of salt, a smudge of graphite. Each piece tiny, insignificant perhaps, but together, They whispered of something deliberate, not chance. The others spoke of a heart, of frailty, of accident. Poirot knew better. Sir Lionel Beresford had not been merely the victim of age or heat. Something had been contrived, and someone in the house had contrived it. The details, Poirot murmured to himself. Always, it is the details. And the details here, they do not agree. Chapter 4, Suspicions Take Root. By mid-afternoon the shock had flattened into that peculiar hush households adopt after calamity. Fires were poked too often, doors closed more softly than needed, and every footfall seemed to apologize for existing. Japp set a constable from the village at the front gate and another by the path to the conservatory, then established himself in the morning room with a notebook and the air of a man who would not be moved by anything short of an earthquake. Poirot preferred to move. He made his small circuits, hall to terrace, terrace to glass, glass to potting shed, like a clock second-hand marking out a patient geometry. Each turn produced a crumb, not much alone, but inviting in company. Begin with motives, A. Japp called when Poirot drifted past his open door. Lay them in a row and see which one wriggles. Motives are plentiful, said Poirot. Means and opportunity, they are the gourmets, more choosy. He gestured delicately. Come, we interview. First, the nephew. Ivo Beresford waited in the billiard room, chalking a cue without intent. He looked better suited to laughter than to grief, but he had neither in him, only a raw, combustible restlessness. Your uncle's plans, Japp began, meant what for you? Ivo's mouth tilted. A lecture on thrift, usually. And lately, threats. He liked to suggest I take the merchant service. Can you see me at sea? He set down the cue. He was also, he hesitated. Close to signing everything green and growing away. The orchids, I mean. The collection's worth a fortune. Poirot's eyebrows climbed a polite millimeter. Yet the deed leaves the house to you. So I'm told. His gaze flitted to the window, down the slope towards the harbour. A house is only a house if you can afford to keep the roof on. There are obligations. Bookmakers? Japp offered. Ivo coloured. It is not a crime to be unlucky. No, said Poirot, but it is imprudent to be unlucky and desperate. Tell us where you were from 10 o'clock this morning. On the terrace. Then down to the stables. I spoke to Tate by the potting shed around 20 past. He said the old man had locked himself in as usual. After that I walked to the lane to meet the post, no post. I saw the fish van rattling up, that's all. Poirot watched his hands. Long fingers. A habit of reaching and withdrawing. Not a killer's hands by nature, but nature is plastic when money presses it. Your relations with the gardener? Poirot asked. We like each other when we are not speaking, Ivo said wryly. He thinks I am idle, I think he is insubordinate. We are both right. Merci, said Poirot, and took his leave. Lady Eugenie received them in the small sitting room that held her writing desk and a spray of early tulips struggling against the season. She was composed in dove-grey wool, gloveless now, though a faint echo of bergamot still haunted the cushions. My husband was not an easy man, she said before either of them had asked a question. But he was not cruel. Not intentionally. Intention, murmured Poirot, is a delicate thread. She looked at him steadily. You think he was murdered? I think, said Poirot, that he did not die as men usually do when they lock themselves in a warm room and look at flowers. Her breath caught, just once. The deed, does it stand? That is a matter for solicitors, Japp said. What concerns us is whether anyone wished it otherwise. Many wished it otherwise. Her smile was tired. Dr. Calder despised the drama of private patronage. Mr. Tate despised anything that moved his pots without asking. Evo despised being told to grow up. She paused. I asked Lionel to consider an annuity for the staff if he meant to change everything. He said we would discuss it. We had not. Your acquaintance with Dr. Calder? Poirot asked, as if asking about the weather. A professional friendship. He writes, I admire people who finish things. If there is a rumor to the contrary, it is lazy. She folded her hands. May I ask, do you have any reason to connect his death with anything improper? Only that improper things leave proper traces, Poirot said mildly. And I am finding traces. She nodded, as if that were an answer she expected but did not want. Miss Eleanor Rowan awaited them in Sir Lionel's study, where she had arranged the late man's correspondence into faultless stacks. Her pencil lay precisely parallel to the blotter. She did not waste words. I tendered my notice last week, she said. To forestall speculation. Sir Lionel asked me to stay through the signing. A new position, mademoiselle? Poirot asked. A return to London. Less weather. The faintest smile. My reasons were mine. However, I will say this, I do not thrive where caprice is mistaken for genius. Japp flicked a glance at Poirot. Caprice? Miss Rowan tapped a folder. Labels changed at whim. Schedules altered by speech rather than by notice. Promises made to the staff at Christmas, forgotten by Candlemas. She slid a sheet towards Poirot. On the blotter paper beneath, a ghost of type pressed through faintly. Poirot lifted the blotter, turned it to the light, and read the mirror of yesterday's unsent letter. Following the transfer, rationalization of household staff will be necessary. He replaced the blotter neatly. You keep a tidy ship, mademoiselle. It is my only creed. She hesitated. There is one more thing. The deed as drafted ensures the collection bears Sir Lionel's name alone. Mr. Tate contributed to a notable hybrid. Sir Lionel refused to acknowledge it. A small meanness, Japp said. Miss Rowan's eyes were cool. Small meannesses are the grit that make murder plausible. Poirot inclined his head, approving the thought even as he guarded against its neatness. Dr. Malcolm Calder had taken possession of the library as though it were a podium. He stood by the fire, spine straight enough to be used as a ruler. You must understand the ethics, he began before greetings were finished. Private hoarding of scientific treasure distorts the discipline. If Beresford had gifted his collection 5 years ago, we would be farther in our work on pollination mechanisms. Work which would bear your name, Japp said dryly. Calder allowed himself a thin smile. Names matter to donors, not to science. And yet, Poirot said, you appear in journals more often than most names I can recall. I appear because I finish what I begin, Calder snapped. Now or his death. Heat, poor ventilation, I warned him. He would not listen. He gestured towards the conservatory with a flick of disdain. If you require a scientific aside, note that carbonic gas, carbon dioxide, will settle in low places when generated. Gardeners sometimes enrich greenhouses with it. Fools have asphyxiated themselves meddling with stoves. Poirot's moustaches gave the smallest twitch. A useful aside, he said. Did you enrich Sir Lionel's greenhouse this morning, Doctor? Calder flushed. I did not touch his precious hothouse. Your insinuation is noted and absurd. Absurdities, murmured Poirot, often warm their hands at the fire of truth. They found Gideon Tate where all gardeners seek comfort, in work. He was staking peas against the wind, jaw set, hat rammed down as if to keep thought from blowing out. You were near the shed at 10:20, Jap said. You saw no one go in or out of the glass house. I saw the door closed, same as always. Tate drove a cane into the soil with more force than required. He told me to keep off. Private inspection, he said. As if I'd steal glances from his orchids. You have pride in a hybrid, Poirot said gently. One that ought to bear two names. Tate's mouth hardened. Beresford took the saw to labels as he pleased. My work, his credit. He said London would show it with his story under it. That's a theft worse than pocketing a watch. The fish van, Poirot said. You saw it? Right before 11. Mrs. Pretty signed. They bring proper ice and the other sort, the smoking blocks, for the summer. Fishermen keep their catch fresh with it. He glanced towards the conservatory, then away. Nothing to do with me. Of course, Poirot said. Bricks, do you keep any in the glass house? Bricks? No. Bricks hold up walls, not orchids. He wouldn't allow a speck of common clay in there unless it wore a silver label. Merci, Monsieur Tate. Mrs. Priddy, when summoned, arrived with her keys chiming like a muted bell. She stood square, the authority of kitchens wrapped around her like an apron. You signed for fish at 11, Jap said. I did. Haddock and kippers. Friday is Friday. Dry ice. Poirot asked, the words carefully casual. She frowned as if at a foreign phrase, then, realizing, sniffed. The smoking sort? We've had it when the weather is hot. Keeps creams and such. I've no use for it this week. Her face did not change. Is there a reason we are discussing groceries over a dead gentleman? Groceries are very intimate, Poirot said. They go where family cannot. She met his gaze without the flutter of a lash. Nothing comes into this house without my knowledge, monsieur. That is my duty. And nothing goes out of it without my consent. That is my pride. Formidable, Poirot murmured. You carried a tray to the conservatory at 10:30. A tray with labels. Mr. Tate misfiles and then curses the cards. I was told to take them. I took them. I saw no one, I left them on the bench, and I went about my work. Jap scratched a note. We'll need to look through your stores. You may count my spoons while you're about it, she said crisply, and withdrew. By 4 o'clock the sky had lowered, and a damp dusk came on early from the sea. Poirot walked once more to the potting shed. He opened a cupboard and considered the neat stack of clay saucers. One was cleaner than the rest, as if recently scoured. When he ran a finger around its rim, a whisper of grit answered. On a nail hung a length of thin cord with a tidy loop tied at one end, a simple little fisherman's trick, the knot finished with pride. He returned to the conservatory door and inspected the inner latch again. The faint graphite bruise on the metal had not invented itself. A cord through a high ventilation slot, a hook to the snib, then a drawer and a tidy click, so could a person outside mimic the act of a man inside. Clumsy, but serviceable. Not the master stroke, he told the orchids. An accessory only. He stood very still. In stillness, his mind arranged itself. He had, now, a small society of facts, a cracked thermometer, a saucer with the ghost of crystals, a scent of bergamot at odd hours, a left-handed smear on a deed, a shipping forecast scrap, a cord with a clever loop, a gardener's wounded pride, a doctor's lecture on heavy gases, a nephew's nervous eye for the harbour, a housekeeper's dominion over thresholds. He considered opportunities. Sir Lionel alone in his glass kingdom, the door locked by habit, steam on the panes like curtains. Who could approach unseen? Who could carry a thing in that left no stain but an evaporating cold? Who would know the rhythms of the house well enough to slip in and out between bell and luncheon? Japp appeared at his shoulder, rubbing his hands. We've alibis, of a sort. No one snug as a bug, but no one dangling either. What does your little grey paint box tell you? It says, Poirot replied, that the passions here are arranged like a formal garden. Neat hedges, sharp edges, and a few hidden nettles for the unwary. Someone has pricked his finger, I must find where the drop of blood fell. He lifted the saucer, replaced it exactly, and smoothed a finger over a small rectangular patch of shelf where dust refused to settle, the remembered absence of a brick-sized thing. Means, opportunity, motive, each now had a candidate. Yet none would be chosen today. Patience, Poirot told Japp. The night is a lens. It clarifies. And as the lamps were lit and the household gathered itself for a sombre supper, the sea sent up its steady breath, the glass house glimmered like a thing alive, and in the quiet machinery of Poirot's mind, the first true shape of the method took root. Chapter 5, Night Voices, Quiet Hands. The household at Moor End moved through supper like actors repeating lines from a play they had grown tired of. Conversation faltered, knives clinked against plates with exaggerated care, and even the fire seemed reluctant to flare. The shadow of Sir Lionel's absence spread across the table, where once a booming voice would have chastised, argued, or demanded, there was now only silence. Lady Eugenie ate little, pushing food around her plate while offering small remarks about the weather. Ivo drank more than was polite, until Miss Rowan's sharp glance silenced him into sullen quiet. Dr. Calder seized the chance to lecture about taxonomy until Mr. Tate banged his spoon down hard enough to rattle the cutlery. Mrs. Priddy presided over the serving with the dignity of a judge, her expression unreadable. Poirot, immaculate as ever, partook of only soup and bread. He sat like a man listening to music too faint for others to hear, his gaze drifting from face to face, never lingering long. When dessert was set down, a plain custard, unadorned, he remarked gently, "No trifle tonight, madam." Mrs. Priddy stiffened. "Not in mourning." She moved on without another word. Poirot's moustaches twitched, satisfied with her reaction. Later, the house quieted. One by one lamps were extinguished, doors closed, and the soft rustle of footsteps gave way to stillness. Poirot retired to his chamber, but he did not undress. He sat by the small fire, polishing his silver brushes and humming a tune, waiting for the clock to wind its way into night. By 1 o'clock the house lay hushed. Only the sea made sound, its rhythm steady against the shingle. Poirot slipped from his room, his patent shoes gloved with felt covers he had brought for just such stealth. He descended the stair, past the stuffed fox whose glass eyes glinted faintly in the moonlight, and paused. There a sound. The scrape of a latch, a faint click of metal. Poirot moved with care along the corridor that led to the terrace doors. The cold air beyond whispered through the gap, carrying the sharp smell of salt. From his place in the shadow of a bay tree on the terrace, Poirot observed. A figure detached itself from the deeper dark and glided across the gravel path towards the conservatory. The moon caught the curve of a shoulder, the shape of a black bag. Whoever it was moved with the care of the guilty. The figure reached the service door of the conservatory and, with a practiced motion, inserted something into the high ventilation slot. A cord dangled, looped, and was drawn downwards. There was a faint metallic snick as the inner snib gave way. The door opened, soundless, and the figure slipped inside. Poirot remained motionless, counting in his head. 1 minute. 2. At 3 he stirred and advanced with the calm certainty of a cat closing in. He signalled once, sharply, towards the shrubbery. From the far side of the terrace, Japp emerged, his overcoat buttoned, revolver glinting in hand. Poirot had anticipated the need for a net to close around the fish. They entered together. The conservatory exhaled its humid breath, damp and heavy. Within, the intruder crouched by a bench, stuffing packets into the black bag. Under the dim glow of the moon, orchids glistened like watchful eyes. The man looked up, startled, and froze. Ivo Beresford. His face drained of colour. What are you doing here? That, said Jap grimly, is the question for you. The bag clattered open. Inside lay neat packets of seeds, each carefully labelled in Sir Lionel's precise hand. Some bore names familiar only to the initiated, hybrids rare enough to fetch a fortune abroad. I wasn't stealing, Ivo stammered. Not truly. Only borrowing. I thought, if the deed was signed, the collection gone, I would be ruined. The house means nothing without money. The seeds were my safeguard. Your safeguard, monsieur, is very incriminating, Poirot said softly. He bent to examine the cord Ivo had used. It bore the same tidy knot he had observed earlier in the shed. Ingenious? None. Effective? Perhaps. You thread the cord through the slot, catch the latch, and so you open or close without being seen. Crude, but it serves. I swear I didn't kill him, Ivo insisted. I came only tonight. If I'd wanted him gone, I could have, well, you can see I didn't. His words tumbled like dice across the floor. Poirot regarded him steadily. You are reckless, yes. Desperate, perhaps. But a murderer? None. The hand that planned Sir Lionel's death worked with elegance. It arranged with precision. Your little trick with the cord, it leaves graphite on the latch, an untidy smear. That is not the touch of genius. Jap cuffed the young man smartly by the shoulder. We'll see what a cell makes of his story. Poirot held up a finger. A moment, mon ami. To rush is to stumble. Monsieur Ivo's foolishness explains the mark upon the latch. But it does not explain the cracked thermometer, the crystals on the saucer, the breath of cold where warmth should reign. Those speak of another hand entirely. Ivo sagged with relief, though shame coloured his cheeks. Then you believe me? I believe you to be a thief, but not a killer, Poirot replied. Alas, the law is seldom as subtle as I. Back in the drawing room, Poirot gathered the household once more. Faces pale with fatigue and suspicion stared back at him. The clock struck 2. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, we are in the presence of many passions, greed, resentment, pride. Tonight we add one more, fear. For see, the nephew, pressed by debt, crept into the conservatory not to kill but to steal. His method was crude, his bag filled with seeds. But his intrusion is important for another reason. He paused, letting his words settle like dust. It tells us that the true murderer relied upon the silence of the conservatory, upon the certainty that no one else would disturb Sir Lionel while he inspected his orchids. Yet Monsieur Ivo's fumbling cord has muddled the scene. What was elegant has been confused with what is clumsy. Someone among you, I think, hopes the one will be mistaken for the other. Lady Eugenie's lips parted, but she said nothing. Miss Rowan's pencil tapped once against her folder. Dr. Calder gave a disdainful sniff. Mr. Tate crossed his arms tightly across his chest. Mrs. Priddy alone looked unshaken, her face set in the lines of duty. Poirot's gaze travelled across them all. I tell you, my friends, the truth is here, in this house. And like an orchid, it is rare, delicate, and poisonous. We shall find it. Later, in his chamber, Poirot sat once more before the fire. He had returned the felt covers to his shoes and now polished them carefully, as if the shine might coax clarity. His mind replayed each detail, the saucer, the frost, the cracking glass, the fishmonger's van. Yes, there was a shape to it now. He could almost see the invisible hand that had placed the fatal piece inside the conservatory, knowing that it would do its silent work while Sir Lionel bent over his orchids. A method without noise, without mark, without mercy. Order and method, he whispered to himself. It is only a matter of arranging the facts as one arranges blooms, by color, by height, by name. When the pattern is true, it will be evident. He closed his eyes. Outside, the sea gave a long, hollow sigh, as though it too carried secrets on its tide. And Poirot, neat as a cat curled by the fire, allowed himself the briefest rest. Tomorrow would bring fresh revelations. But tonight, he had caught a thief, and with him, the outline of a murderer's design. Chapter 6, The Shape of a Theory. Morning crept into Moor End reluctantly, as though the house itself resisted the day. The gulls wheeled, shrill and merciless, over the harbour. Inside, the servants moved with hushed steps, trays covered, doors opened and closed as quietly as violins being packed away. Poirot appeared in the breakfast room at 9 precisely, immaculate in grey, his moustaches waxed to points that declared order even in grief. Lady Eugenie sat pale in lavender silk, sipping tea without appetite. Ivo slouched, nursing a cup of coffee like a talisman against disaster. Miss Rowan was already at work with her ledger. Dr. Calder read a newspaper as though it were a courtroom record and he the judge. Mr. Tate refused a chair, preferring to stand by the window, earth still under his fingernails. Mrs. Priddy, ever austere, directed the footman with her usual authority. Poirot partook of only a roll. When he had buttered it to a geometrical perfection, he set it down and cleared his throat gently. Miss Amos, I ask for a little experiment. Nothing dangerous, unless you count to pride. You will humour me, yes? Lady Eugenie blinked. An experiment? Here? Not here, madam, but in the conservatory, where yesterday we discovered tragedy. Inspector Japp has kindly fetched me what I require. All eyes turned to Japp, who entered bearing a tray, a china bowl, a pitcher of water, and a stubby candle. His grin was reluctant but resigned. I'm just the stagehand in this theatre, folks. They gathered in the conservatory, damp and glistening once more with the breath of its orchids. The air was close, sweet, and faintly oppressive. Poirot placed the bowl upon a bench, filled it with water, and set the candle upon the slatted walkway nearby. We imagine, Poirot said softly, that the bowl holds a thing colder than ice. Not common ice, no, but the kind the fishmongers know. It smokes in the air. It burns the hand if you linger too long. You know it, Inspector, dry ice, solid carbon dioxide. The fishermen use it to keep their cargo fresh upon the journey inland. Dr. Calder snorted. What has this to do with anything? Patience, Doctor. You are fond of science, indulge me in mine. Poirot struck a match and lit the candle. The small flame wavered bravely. Observe. He poured soda water slowly into the bowl. A fizz rose up, spilling bubbles that burst soundlessly. The candle's flame danced, then shrank. Within moments, it guttered out entirely. There, Poirot said quietly. You see? The invisible lake. Carbonic gas lies low, it displaces the sweet air. A man bending over orchids, his head close to the benches, would breathe not life but suffocation. He would faint, his heart might fail. He would not cry out. He would simply fall. A silence fell heavy upon the group. Only the drip of condensation broke it. It is preposterous, Calder declared, though his voice shook faintly. Dry ice is harmless when handled with care. It dissipates. Just so, Poirot agreed. But in sufficient quantity, enclosed in a house of glass, the effect is lethal. Consider yesterday. A cracked thermometer, why cracked, unless from sudden cold? A clay saucer beneath the bench, rimmed with frost where no frost should live. A residue of crystals not from sugar, nor from salt for the path. And what did the fishmonger tell me? That 2 blocks of dry ice were delivered here, ordered under the name of the housekeeper. All eyes shifted at once to Mrs. Priddy. She did not flinch. I ordered fish, she said crisply. The ice comes with it. I sent back what was not required. Poirot inclined his head. And yet, madam, 1 block remains unaccounted for. Mrs. Priddy smoothed her apron, the gesture precise, controlled. You are suggesting that I, what? Carried a smoking block into that place? Ridiculous. I have a kitchen to run, not a laboratory to play in. Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. Madam, no one in this house controls what enters and leaves as you do. The butler is gone these 5 years, the footmen are lads who obey. It is you who signs the books, who greets the tradesman, who holds the purse. Her lips pressed into a line. And what motive would I have? He paid my wages. He gave me a home. Did he? Poirot asked gently. Or did he threaten to take it away? Consider, he intended to gift the orchids. And after that, Poirot glanced at Miss Rowan, who reluctantly slid forward the blotter with its ghost of yesterday's draft letter. After that, he meant to reduce the household staff. Dismissals. Economies. A flicker, brief but real, crossed Mrs. Priddy's stern face. Lady Eugenie gasped. He never told me. Because it was not yet announced, Poirot said softly. But someone heard. Someone who would lose not just a post, but a lifetime's place. For you, madam, more end is not merely wages. It is your identity, your pride. To be cast out after decades, it is a cruelty, even if not intended so. Mrs. Priddy said nothing. She stood as rigid as the poker by the hearth. Poirot turned slowly, letting the silence stretch. Now, consider the plan. It is simple, elegant, silent. Place the block of dry ice in a dish upon the shelf. Sir Lionel enters, alone as always. He bends low over his orchids. The gas, invisible, lies heavy. He breathes it in, once, twice, thrice. He collapses. By the time anyone forces the door, the evidence has melted. Only a rim of frost remains. And the death appears natural, the heart defeated by heat. He clasped his hands. That is the theory. Japp whistled low. Neat enough, Poirot. Too neat, maybe. You mean she lugged the stuff in under a tray and left it? Poirot nodded. She herself said she carried labels to the conservatory. Convenient, is it not? A tray conceals much. Later, when the block had done its work, she returned to remove the dish. But haste betrayed her. One saucer, washed but not dried, found its way back to the stack, too clean. A scrap of newspaper from the fishmonger's wrapping ended up damp in the potting shed. Little things, yes, but little things are my speciality. Mrs. Priddy's voice, when it came, was low. And if I had? What difference does it make? He is gone. He was to dismiss me as if I were a scullery maid, to send me to a lodging house in Portsmouth with a pension that would not keep me in stockings. I gave my life to this house. I had nowhere else. Her eyes shone, though no tear fell. If I did it, and I do not say I did, it was no more than justice. Poirot's gaze was kind. Justice, madam, is not ours to take. It is a heavy stone, when we lift it, it crushes us also. Japp shifted uncomfortably. We'll need proof enough before we clap irons on anyone. But I'll be damned if the pieces don't fit. Poirot raised a hand. Patience. Always patience. We must confirm. For now, I say only this: Sir Lionel did not die by chance. He died because someone carried into his temple of orchids a block of winter and left it to breathe for him the fatal air. They left the conservatory in silence. The orchids glistened in their glass tomb, beautiful and pitiless. Outside, the wind freshened from the sea, carrying gull cries sharp as knives. Poirot walked alone for a time on the terrace, hands folded neatly behind his back. The shape of the crime had revealed itself to him, but shapes were not enough. He must have every thread, every stitch, before he would permit himself the satisfaction of final revelation. He looked once more at the conservatory, its panes flashing like eyes. So, he murmured, we are nearer the truth. But nearer, too, to the danger. For the one who planned so coldly may yet have the courage to strike again. And with that he adjusted his hat, brushed away a speck of imaginary dust, and returned to the house where suspicion already rooted itself like ivy in the cracks of stone. Chapter 7: Gathering the Threads. By late afternoon, Morend had settled into that uneasy quiet peculiar to houses where the dead still weigh upon the carpets. Outside, the wind came barreling in from the sea, slanting rain against the panes. Inside, the lamps were lit a shade earlier than needed, as though the household were impatient for the safety of evening. Jap, after a tramp to the harbour, returned damp-coated and tight-lipped. Poirot received him in the little writing-room off the hall. "Well?" Poirot asked. "The fishmonger's a talker," Jap grunted, flipping his notebook shut. "2 blocks of the smoking stuff delivered at 11 sharp, ordered special by name from the house. Says he's brought it here in summer for puddings, but not in weather like this." Bill signed in the housekeeper's hand. Poirot's eyes gentled. "Bon. The facture will have a copy. Rowan has it in the accounts." Jap rubbed his hands at the fire. "You mean to have them all in the same room again?" Poirot nodded. "At 4:30. There is dust out of place, we must let it settle before the right eyes." Before the appointed hour, Poirot paid 2 brief calls. The first was to Miss Rowan. He found her at a small table near the window, the ledger open, a pencil placed with soldierly exactness beside it. "You wish the household accounts, Monsieur Poirot," she said, already reaching. Mr. Jap mentioned it. "Merci, mademoiselle." Poirot accepted the book with fingertips that never smudged. The entry was neat: haddock, kippers, paid. Ice, common. Ice, solid carbonic, 2 blocks, charged. Signed, M. Priddy. There was a tiny tick against the last line, the kind a tidy mind makes when it means to remind itself of something disagreeable. "Unusual, this purchase, for March?" Poirot asked mildly. "Unusual," Miss Rowan agreed. "The kitchen does not require it in cold weather." "And the duplicate bill?" "In this folder." She laid out the fishmonger's chit, where the pencil 2 special was underlined once, as if for emphasis. Poirot closed the ledger. "You see everything, mademoiselle." "I put things where they can be seen," she corrected. "That is not the same." His second call was to the pantry. He did not enter fully, he stood in the doorway and let his senses work. Brass gleamed, linens lay square, the air carried the faint tang of metal and salt that kitchens collect without realizing. On a dresser shelf, stacks of clay saucers, more than a gardener would need indoors, were arranged by size. One, second from the top, showed the severe cleanliness of something recently scoured and dried in haste. Poirot did not touch it. He allowed himself only a polite glance, the sort a guest gives a painting he means to return to later, alone. Mrs. Priddy, appearing from the scullery, found him thus. Her keys chimed softly. "You wish something, sir?" "Only to admire your order, madam," Poirot said, with a bow. "It is a language I read fluently." Her mouth did not move, but something in the planes of her face altered, as though a picture had been straightened to reveal a mark beneath. At 4:30, the drawing-room filled obediently. The sea hurled itself at the shingle, the fire talked in quick tongues. Poirot stood not quite in the centre of the room, so that none would feel arranged, and yet all were. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, hands folded, "forgive the ceremony. It is not a play I present, but the arrangement of facts." He let his glance rest, one by one, on each face. First, Monsieur Ivo. The young man flinched. "You have behaved like a child who fears a storm and steals his neighbour's umbrella. You crept into the conservatory at 1 in the morning, you took seeds, you used a cord to play tricks with a latch. Your hands left the graphite that misled the eye. Your act was criminal, but not murderous. Inspector Japp will decide what consequence fits that foolishness. As for me, I put you aside in this matter." Ivo swallowed, colour rising. He said nothing, but his shoulders loosened a fraction. Second, Mademoiselle Rowan. Poirot inclined his head. "You are left-handed, a smear appears on a deed where a left hand might brush. You were preparing your departure, your temper dislikes caprice. These are facts, but they do not sing of murder. A woman who makes such exact notes does not choose the chaos of crime." Miss Rowan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I am gratified to be spared by my stationery. Third, Dr. Calder." Poirot's tone remained courteous. "You have opinions, formidable ones, about where orchids should live. You dislike Sir Lionel's vanity, you relish the order of institutions. But you live by journals and committees. Murder is messier than letters to editors." Calder bristled. "If this is absolution, deliver it without sneer." "It is neither absolution nor sneer," said Poirot, unruffled. "It is the balance of character and opportunity. This morning at 11 you were in the library hectoring an article into sense, 3 witnesses will attest. Your knowledge of heavy gases is interesting, your use of them, not proven." Calder's nostrils flared, he subsided. Fourth, Monsieur Tate. Poirot turned to the gardener, who stood as if braced for weather. "You had cause to resent Sir Lionel's habit of putting his name to work that was not only his. Your pride is touchy, your hands are strong. But pride is not intent. More, your manner with the plants is rough, love, you would sooner break a window than a blossom. And this, what was done, was the work of someone who wishes to leave no bruise upon a petal." Tate looked away quickly, jaw tight. "He wronged me. It was not a defence, merely a truth. Lastly, Lady Eugenie." Poirot's voice was soft. "You would gain by freedom, perhaps, lose by the deed, perhaps. You were fond of gloves scented with bergamot, noticeable, yes, but harmless. And you are not a woman of conspiracies. If you wished to change your life, you would ask a solicitor, not a fishmonger." A few eyebrows rose. Lady Eugenie coloured, then laughed, a small, tired sound. "I shall take that as a compliment, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot bowed. Then he faced the person who had not been addressed. "And so, Mrs. Priddy." The housekeeper stood straight, as if receiving an inventory. "Sir." "Nothing comes into this house without your consent," Poirot said gently. "The fishmonger's bill shows 2 blocks of the special ice were ordered, you signed. In summer, perhaps, for trifles, in March, never. You took a tray to the conservatory at 10:30, with labels, you said. A tray conceals much. When Sir Lionel was found, there was a clay saucer washed too clean, a rim of crystals where frost should not live, and a cracked thermometer, signs of sudden cold. And later, in the shed, a damp scrap of the shipping forecast that had wrapped a thing that smokes and burns to the touch." Her chin lifted a degree. "You have made your speech, sir." "I have set the stage," Poirot corrected. I have not drawn the curtain. That is for tomorrow. But I must warn you, there is proof to seek still. A dish, perhaps, put away in haste, a small paper folded behind a tea caddy, the note of a plan, financial, unkind, pressed through a blotter. When we have these, the shape will be complete. The room seemed to lean forward. Lady Eugenia's hand trembled, she set her cup down before it rattled. Miss Rowan's pencil recorded nothing, she only watched. Dr. Calder let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Tate stared at the carpet, reading patterns. Japp, who knew Poirot's ways, said nothing at all. Poirot went on, matter-of-fact as a clerk settling accounts. You see, what was done could only be done by one who moves where servants move, at hours when the family does not look. A person who can carry a weight from the kitchen door to the glasshouse unnoticed. A person whom deliveries obey, and boys with vans greet by name. A person for whom locked doors are not barriers, because the keys hang from the belt. Mrs. Priddy's face did not alter. It's a grand tale, monsieur. But tales are not proofs. Just so, Poirot said, almost kindly. That is why we do not end tonight. He changed tack with the neatness of a man folding a handkerchief into another square. There remains also the matter of compassion, he said. Sir Lionel intended economies. He wrote a letter unsent. He spoke perhaps in a kitchen, not aware that kitchens are places where words are remembered like recipes. A woman who has kept a house all her life does not easily imagine herself kept by anyone. Fear, Miss Amis, is the author of many clumsy chapters, it sometimes writes a clever one. No one answered. Outside, the wind shouldered the house, a flurry of rain hissed on the coals in the grate before the fire snatched the heat back. Poirot looked round the circle and allowed himself a small, precise nod, as if the company had performed adequately. Tonight, he said, we rest. No one leaves the house, Inspector Japp's men will see to that. In the morning, I shall ask for a brief search, no rummaging, no indignities, merely a matter of confirming one or two small domestic facts. After that, I will speak. Dr. Calder bristled again. It is intolerable to be left in suspense. Life, said Poirot, is intolerable, doctor, except when it is not. Courage. He dismissed them with the politeness of a maître d'hôtel clearing a table. They dispersed, each taking his or her private weather into the corridors. Poirot did not go straight to his room. He walked the service route instead, along the back passage, past the boot room, down the short flight to the yard where deliveries came. The stones were wet and shining, a fish scale clung like a moon to a drain. He stood a long moment under the lee of the wall, feeling the skin of the house under his hand, its doors, its habits, its small routines. Murderers, he reflected, are seldom magicians, they are housekeepers of another sort, arranging, tidying, wiping, trusting that the ordinary will disguise the exceptional. He returned inside. Passing the library he glimpsed Lady Eugenia alone, staring at the fire as if memorizing it. Upstairs, Miss Rowan closed a suitcase and reopened it, as if uncertain whether leaving were an act of guilt or health. In the smoking room, Evo sat without a drink, which told Poirot more than any glass could. In a corner of the hall, Tate studied a seed catalogue with the intensity of a man reading his own fate, while Dr. Calder scribbled an angry paragraph and struck it out again. In the pantry doorway, Mrs. Priddy stood smoothing an already smooth tablecloth. Her palm moved back and forth, regular, exacting, erasing wrinkles that did not exist. She lifted her head as Poirot passed. "Sleep well, madam," he said. "If God permits," she replied. Poirot mounted the stairs, the corners of his mind placing the last few objects upon the mantelpiece of order. Tomorrow, he thought, would be sufficient. Tonight, the house must be permitted its vigil. He set his watch upon the bedside table, aligned it with the matchbox and the candlestick, and, after one last look at the black hinge of sea in the distance, turned out the lamp. The wind moved, the glass house sighed, and more end waited for morning and the little man who had promised to make plain what fear had tried so artfully to conceal. Chapter 8. The Curtain Falls. The morning dawned brittle and bright, as though the sea had scrubbed the sky clean during the night. Moor stood grey but resolute against the light. Within its walls, the household stirred uneasily, for everyone knew this was to be the day. Inspector Japp had taken breakfast with the air of a man sharpening his pencil for the last page. Poirot, by contrast, appeared serene, taking chocolate in bed and humming to himself until the clock struck 9. By 10, all were gathered in the library: Lady Eugenie, pale but composed, Evo, fidgeting, Miss Rowan, notebook balanced on her knee, Dr. Calder, scowling with impatience, Tate, stiff as a rooted oak, and Mrs. Priddy, standing tall, her keys at her side. Japp leaned against the mantelpiece, arms folded, leaving the stage to Poirot. Poirot stood at the centre, his patent shoes gleaming, his moustaches precise. He bowed slightly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "at last, we arrive. You are weary of suspicion, weary of doubt. So let us place each fact in its place, and from the arrangement let the truth emerge, as an orchid blooms when light is just so." He lifted a finger. First, the manner of death. Sir Lionel did not die of the heart alone. No, he was suffocated by the invisible hand of carbonic gas, released when a block of dry ice was placed within the conservatory. The evidence? A cracked thermometer, betrayed by sudden cold. A clay saucer rimmed with crystals, though no frost was in the air. A residue finer than salt. And the doctor's own words, that heavy gas settles in low places. It was science, but turned into murder. A murmur went around the room. Poirot continued, "Second, the means of entry. The conservatory was locked. The only key lay with Sir Lionel. Yet, there was a smudge of graphite on the inner latch, left by a cord threaded through the high ventilation slot. Who used such a trick? Monsieur Evo. Last night, desperate, he crept into steel seeds, employing the same method. Thus, the untidy smear was his, not the murderer's. Foolish, yes, but not fatal. Evo reddened, opened his mouth, then shut it again. Poirot moved on. Third, the motive. Here we look to Sir Lionel's intentions. He meant to sign away his orchids to London. This angered Dr. Calder, who believed private collections a vanity. It wounded Monsieur Tate, whose pride in his hybrid was denied. It disappointed Lady Eugenie, who feared the loss of social grandeur. It troubled Mademoiselle Rowan, weary of her employer's caprice. Yet these grievances alone, none fatal. They did not strike the heart. But for one person, the signing meant something more terrible: dismissal, loss of home, loss of identity. Poirot turned gently towards the housekeeper. Mrs. Priddy. All eyes fixed upon her. She did not flinch. Fourth, the opportunity, Poirot said. At 10:30, you carried a tray to the conservatory. Labels, you said. Yet a tray may bear more than cards. It may bear a block of dry ice, concealed beneath a cloth. You place it in the saucer, upon the bench. Sir Lionel enters soon after, as he always does. He bends to his orchids, the gas enfolds him. By the time the guests gather, he is dead, and the block has melted to nothing. Silent, invisible, ingenious. Lady Eugenie whispered, but how could you know? Because, madam, little details betray us. A saucer scrubbed too clean. A fishmonger's chit with 2 blocks marked special. A scrap of newspaper from the wrapping, damp in the shed. And more, the Mrs. Priddy's own words, nothing comes into this house without my knowledge. Ah, but knowledge can also mean control. Mrs. Priddy's lips thinned. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot. But proof? Poirot inclined his head. Always, there must be proof. Inspector Japp, if you please. Japp produced a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He opened it to reveal the very clay saucer Poirot had inspected yesterday, now faintly rimmed with a crust of white. Found it in the pantry, under a stack, just where you said. And with it, Poirot added softly, the faintest trace of the crystals that are not salt but the ghost of carbonic ice. The chemist in the village confirms it. That, madam, is proof enough. The silence in the library deepened, broken only by the cease-fire boom. At last, Mrs. Priddy spoke. I did it, she said simply. I will not dissemble. You have laid it out as neat as I laid the linens in that house. Her voice was not angry, only tired. For 40 years I kept this place. I raised no family, I belonged to Morend. And he would have dismissed me as one dismisses a maid, with a letter and a week's notice. To live in a lodging house? To pass my days waiting for charity? Better to end it here. He thought himself master of orchids, I showed him the cruelty of orchids. Lady Eugenie sobbed into her handkerchief. Tate muttered a curse. Dr. Calder turned aside, his face unreadable. Poirot stepped forward. His voice was gentle. Madam, you gave your life to this house. You believed it owed you the same. But justice, it is not ours to seize. Murder does not restore dignity, it only robs you of it. Mrs. Priddy straightened, her keys jangling faintly. Dignity I keep. The rest, let the law take. Japp moved forward. She did not resist as he laid a hand on her arm. Poirot looked around the room. His eyes were kind but stern. You see, Miss Amos, how murder grows. Not always from hatred, but from fear. Fear of loss, fear of change. For Mrs. Priddy, the orchids were not flowers but the locks of her prison. She chose to strike rather than be cast out. It was wrong, but, it is human. He spread his hands. The case is complete. Sir Lionel will rest, his orchids will go to London as he decreed, and Morend will bear its silence once more. Later, as the police carriage took Mrs. Priddy away, Poirot and Japp stood upon the terrace. The conservatory gleamed coldly in the morning sun, its glass catching the light like 1,000 eyes. Well, Poirot, Japp said, shaking his head, I'll give it you, ingenious, and chilling. Who'd think to turn ice into a murder weapon? Poirot sighed. It was clever, yes. But not brilliant. For brilliance lies not in the method, but in the mind that foresees its discovery. And Mrs. Priddy, she was clever only enough to delay, not to escape. He adjusted his hat, smoothing the brim. Come, my friend. There will be paperwork for you, and for me perhaps a little chocolate. Japp chuckled grimly. Trust you to think of sweets after murder. Poirot smiled faintly. Life, mon cher Japp, is short. One must sweeten it where one may. They turned, and the sea roared its endless applause, as though even it could not quite decide whether to mourn or to marvel.